If you could ever help me find out where this quote exactly comes from, I need to know, because I've been desperately searching for the original source. I don't doubt that it was him, but I need to be able to put chapter and verse to this as well. This is also another reason why it's only a limited pre-publication edition. But listen to him. He says, "We are called to bethink ourselves of the Christian basics of Europe by forming a democratic model of governance which through reconciliation develops into a community of peoples in freedom, equality, solidarity and peace, and which is deeply rooted in Christian basic values." That's why I call it deeply rooted. I'd like to perhaps make a more popular version just for students and edit it somewhat and call it maybe 3 minutes or 3 minutes that reshaped Europe, something like that. Because, you see, I believe that that was the defining moment of modern Europe, modern European history, more so than the fall of the Berlin Wall. The fall of the Berlin Wall was the collapse of something negative. But what was it falling into? I mean, what was the positive that was there? Peter from Estonia is going to share a little bit in the church service tomorrow as an Estonian, what it was like to move from the Soviet Union to the European Union. And, but there was a huge problem at the end of World War II, because when Hitler was defeated, peace didn't break out at all. War stopped. But who won the peace? This week we've been having all sorts of commemoration services across Europe, remembering the dead, and then celebrating the victory, the liberation that came 65 years ago. But who won the peace? And what motivated them? And we need to know, it was in our curriculum. We need to develop curriculum on this. And not only that, the whole area of how the Bible has so shaped our past. We can talk about art and architecture, even agriculture. We can talk about education, all the way through, whether it be kindergarten, and primary school, secondary school, university levels. There's been Christians who have so laid the foundations, I should say, on the basis of Jewish foundations as well. When it comes to politics, I'm just reading a book by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who's the chief rabbi of the British Commonwealth. And he writes in there about a forgotten political classic, which Milton and Hobbes and Locke and other political theorists constantly went back to and referred to as the source of their inspiration for our modern liberal democracy. And he said that classic was the Hebrew Bible, because that's where we discover the beginnings of understanding what the state is all about and the relationship between state and society. Now, one of the things that comes out of the Schuman story is the limits of politics. You see, if we're looking to the men and women who meet in this building here to discover the soul of Europe for us, we're looking in the wrong place. They can help us with the skeleton, but where's the soul going to come from? That's a task for the body of Christ. And the last official thing that Jacques Delors did as the president of the European Commission was to appeal to religious leaders across Europe to help us discover the soul of Europe. Now, where do we go to discover the soul of Europe? We've got to go back to the roots. We've got to understand what breathed life into Europe in the first place. And Europe was simply, as I referred to earlier today, the Western Peninsula of the Eurasian landmass. Our forefathers, who, if we have European forefathers, we came from the East, with the people movements, from the East to the West. We have Eastern roots. We speak Indo-European languages. Our forefathers were worshippers of all sorts of gods. You know, yesterday was Friday, the god of fertility. The day before, the god of thunder. The day before, the god of war. You know, in some languages. And yet, something happened that made this continent or this peninsula distinct from where it came from. You see, if our roots are all Eastern, why are we not just West Eurasians? Where did the strong identity of Europe come from, that Europe became known as the continent, when it's the one continent that's not a continent? And the answer is this book, simply this book. When messengers came with this book, and they brought the story of Jesus to people group after people group after people group after people group all across Europe. That was the common experience we had. And this is what has given birth not only to our education, but also to our laws, our government, our health care, our social policies. And in just so many areas of life. But where do we hear about that? Now, you don't have to be a believer to believe this. Even Richard Dawkins says you can't understand European history without an understanding of the Bible and of Christianity. That's on the one hand. Take a person like John Gray, who wrote a book called Straw Dogs. We probably call him a post-humanist. He has written this book that's a scathing attack on humanism, that says humanists are nothing but humanism is nothing but Christianity in disguise. All its values actually are rooted in Christianity, because if you take God out of the picture, human beings are nothing. There is no such thing as human exceptionalism. And his title comes from this, from an ancient Chinese religious ceremony whereby once a year they would make these straw dogs and they'd worship these straw dogs, and the next day they'd throw them away. That's all we are as human beings, he says. I mean, he really believes that himself. And so he's attacking humanists for drawing on biblical concepts for what they think are just self-evident things. So we must recover that lost ground. And that's why we are wanting to draw attention in the first place to the name Schuman, because I believe he is such a pivotal figure for us to help us reclaim our lost heritage. We as evangelical Christians are also often very, very skeptical of anything that comes out of Brussels, and perhaps there's good reason for it. But if we go back to understand the conditions out of which the vision of a Schuman and Adenauer and their Italian colleague de Gasperi had, we will discover how strongly motivated they were in their Christian conviction. Here you see on the back of this cover a quote from Adenauer saying to Schuman, "I regard it as a providential sign that all the weight of the task to be undertaken rests on the shoulders of men who, like you and myself, are filled with a desire to build a new edifice of Europe on Christian foundations. Few occasions in the history of Europe have offered better opportunities for achieving such a goal." The big question is, whatever happened to that vision? Why have we forgotten this? Why is there nothing in English, or very little in English, on this? And I just discovered today Schuman's memoirs have just been republished in English by the Robert Schuman Foundation. Unfortunately, by the time we got to the table, they were all gone, but you can order it on the website. And you will find all sorts of interesting snippets, such as Schuman saying democracy must be rooted in Christianity, otherwise it will become the tyranny of the majority. He was so far-sighted that way back in 1951, he was asked, now, is the Soviet Union part of Russia? And he said, is the Soviet Russia part of Europe? And he says, yes, of course, and we must be ready to receive with open arms all those nations in the East who, when they are free from their present subjugation, want to come and join us. That was back in 1951. You will also read in the original declaration, as part of those 500 words, you'll see that Schuman is saying, as we get our act together and cooperate in industries like coal and steel, instead of using them to have war against each other, we can bless everybody and particularly concentrate on Africa, our special responsibility. I mean, that was a missionary vision way back then at the core of his understanding of what the calling of Europe was. So, there's lots more. I hope you take some time to read that. Please give me feedback, things that you find are not clear or that are plain wrong. I would love to be able to correct it. It's just so difficult to find reliable sources on this whole thing. And so the Schuman Center is going to be a center that looks at recovering biblical perspectives on Europe's past and on Europe's present. How do we respond to main challenges today? Islam in Europe, secularism, new spirituality, economic situation, and so on. As well as recovering future vision. And it aims to try to link existing initiatives that are very often regionally based and try to get people in touch with each other. For example, today we had a lunch together with members of the Schuman Council, and do we have enough of these to go around at all, Kevin?
Yeah.